My secret, just do something that ain't nobody ever done before, but make it sound like something that's always been there forever.
This Filipino American Life is a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States. At iba pa. My name is Elaine Delales, and I am joined by my fellow co-hosts,
Ryan Carpio, Joseph Bernardo,
and
Mike.
Producer Mike.
That thing is back.
Remix.
We're bringing back the air horn as a request from my best friend Ivy Barrera, because she said every time we introduce Producer Mike, you should bring back the air horn. I totally expect you to share this episode again, Ivy.
Just pandering to the fans.
Yep. What are we talking about today, Mike?
I thought it'd be interesting to talk about original Filipino music, also known as OPM.
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 I mean, mainly because, you know, there have been a couple concerts that we've been to, and every time we go to these things, whether it's, you know, the Eraserheads or maybe some of the lesser well-known bands, at least here, like Sandwich, Taken by Cars, Cheats. I'm sure people listening right now have no idea what I'm talking about, actually. But we always notice, you know, either there's not a lot of people there, or there's not a lot of people who seem like, you know, they're Filipinos born in America there. It's mostly like Filipino immigrants who go to these shows because they're familiar with the artists, they're familiar with the language. And so we've been thinking about and talking about with our friends, you know, what drives that? You know, how do people know what OPM is in America? And do people listen to it? And if not, why? Right?
Well, when I think of OPM, I always think of pop ballads that come from the Philippines.
Sample.
Like,
Yeah, sing us one.
Oh, no, that too.
Bakit ngayon ka lang?
Oh, okay.
Bakit ngayon ka lang?
No, anyways. Yeah, I think of that kind of OPM. So every time I think of the music that comes from the Philippines, that's automatically what I think of.
So ballads primarily.
Ballads and kind of the slow poppy top 40 songs.
It's almost like the -1 songs that people would sing karaoke back in the day.
Yeah. But then, you know, especially in the 90s, that's when like kind of the rock music came out. You know, bands like the Eraserheads, River Maya, Parokya, and the Edgar. That came out, and that because it really was popular in the Philippines.
Yeah, I guess a question for you and for all of you. I mean, how did you first encounter OPM in your life?
Oh, wow.
Besides the ballads, but I guess the more modern contemporary versions that
Like the 90s versions, maybe.
like what Joe was alluding to.
I know OPM only. I learned about it through ballads because I went through a 90s Filipino movie phase. And so I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but like Sana Maulit Muli, Bakit the Biskitang Mahal, all of these are Lea Salonga movies that had catchy songs that are they're ballads, they're OPM. But like the rock-ish stuff,
The rocking?
the rock and roll, I didn't really get to till college, because you actually had the Eraserhead single CD, and I remember I like basically stole it from you, and
So that's where it went.
When you were stalking him?
yeah, I was totally stalking Mike. No, but I just took it from you because they won. Or you gave it to me.
I don't think I did. How about you, Ryan?
I actually don't think of OPM when I think of like Eraserheads and River Maya and kind of like the 90s versions. I think of OPM like very old school because original
Like
Filipino.
Ryan Kayabyab.
Yeah, or even like Sharon Cuneta and Gary Valenciano.
All the 80s stuff.
All the 80s stuff.
Kula
is
Desma?
OPM. Kula Desma.
It's like Tito music.
Ray Valera. Exactly. A lot of like singer-songwriter ballads.
Nora Honor.
Yeah, maybe some Nora Honor back then.
Vilma Santos.
So, did she sing? I mean, she may.
I don't know.
Have. I mean, they all kind of do.
She was in a knock. That's all I remember.
But the more modern ones, I remember someone coming from the Philippines and gave me an Eraserheads tape. I believe it might have been a single, but not until college, or maybe like right at the end of high school, did I start listening to like the more rock songs, and then of course I started downloading it.
Yeah.
in in the dorms And next thing you know, Napster, right?
Yeah.
And then Eraserheads had the whole album I downloaded. Then Parokya and Edgar.
Yeah.
And then, River Maya. And then next thing you know, I had all these original Filipino music. But I don't consider that OPM. It just, maybe in my mind, it's just cool, right? It's just cool music.
In OPM in your mind, is that like a Harana or something?
No, that's more modern. OPM to me is like, again, like the Sharon Cuneta and the Ray Valera era, so like 70s and 80s. Like even to me, even some of their disco stuff that, Hot Dog and all that stuff, to me that's OPM.
Hot Dog?
And then in the
is that a real song?
No, it's a
band.
Oh,
like VST.
see, I'm learning.
So like I don't even in like the later ballads, I mean, I guess I could consider like Regine Velasquez OPM.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is for you that
Like,
OPM is linked to a specific era of Filipino music.
Yeah.
As opposed
probably
to
even a
all
genre
music.
too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like things that you karaoke and you, because my brother used to have a song hits book, and so that's kind of his thing, like a guitar chords and stuff.
Like Jose Marie Chan.
Yeah,
And-
exactly.
Yeah.
But also it's because I'm not there anymore. I came here. So what I remembered was like original old stuff. Like from
Or
my
Baby
sister.
Lea Salonga.
Yeah. Or Baby Lea Salonga.
Ryan likes this song good. How about you, Joe? You were saying something about, you were encountering it maybe like...
Yeah, well, so when Tatak Filipino, a store in LA, opened, I used to go there and kind of research music, and I asked for, hey, is there any kind of hip hop stuff here? So then, like, I'd look for like Andrew E, Master Plan,
Francis M.
Francis M. Those are like the three main folks, right? And then I asked the person in the counter, I go, hey, so what's popular in the Philippines now, or what's a good album to buy? And then she gave me an Eraserhead album, and it was the first and ultra magnetic electro pop, something like that. So I got that one, and then I listened to it. I was like, okay. I wasn't really into like rock, folk, alternative music.
Yeah.
But then when I went to the Philippines in this Christmas '95, that's when it was like the height of Eraserheads, and that's when I totally got into it because it would just play everywhere I went.
That's when they were super big, right?
Yeah.
Because like we were in college in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and the Eraserhead singles, like anthology, that was the CD that like everyone had, like all the Filipinos that I knew.
Yeah, because it was towards the tail end of kind of their the height of their popularity.
Yeah.
And they were starting to kind of branch off into different things, and then everyone started joining other bands and forming their own bands.
And then after that, it was harder to know what was popular there. I mean, it was kind of like it wasn't pre-internet, but it wasn't accessible,
right?
Yeah,
like here in America. Like I remember asking my cousins, like in the mid 2000s, hey, so what's a popular band now? And he goes, they're not even popular anymore. Like,
were they listening to like American stuff?
Yeah, they listened to American stuff, or like they were listening to any kind of like top 40 songs. But it like the band scene, the rock scene wasn't as popular as it was back then. At least that was my impression.
So when you listen to this music, though, regardless if it was like the ballads era or maybe the more modern rock stuff, was it predominantly in Tagalog or some other Philippine dialect? And did you understand what they were singing about?
I did. Yeah, I did.
It was always in Tagalog.
Yeah.
Most of the time. I mean, the thing is, for me, it was kind of like when they try to do their English songs, I didn't feel like it was.
It wasn't meaningful enough.
Yeah. To me, it wasn't meaningful enough because it wasn't as different.
Well, like Eraserheads with a Smile.
Yeah,
that's okay.
It's a good song, but I think maybe it's the more nationalist in me, but I just felt like, it's more Filipino if it's Tagalog.
Yeah.
Or like the sentiment isn't there when it's in English. Like my favorite Eraserhead song is Ang Huling El Bimbo. And like, when you listen to the song and then you like listen to the lyrics, like it is like super deep. Like I remember I would like write it down before you could read lyrics or look them up. I would write it down, and then I would and then my brain would have to translate it, right? Because like I have to like go from English to Tagalog, and I would be like, "This is so deep, oh my god!" And then I watched the music video on YouTube later on, and I was like crying watching the video. I was like, oh my god!
You're so emo.
So
I am.
that video I actually used to watch on like a local like channel in Los Angeles,
LA18.
LA18, because sometimes they would show like this Philippine show called ASAP at night.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
and then they would do clips of like MTV Asia, and then they would do clips of Eraserhead's songs, and that was one of them
Videos.
the one of the videos that always pops up.
Well, that was the one that won. I think that year won the MTV International
exactly.
Music Video
Oh,
Award.
so
Yeah.
that's why it
And
was
so that's
around.
even how
a
I
lot.
even heard of the Eraserheads in the first place was this band from the Philippines called the Eraserheads, and they showed part of the video. And I was like, wait, there's,
It's like
there's
super
bands in the
deep,
Philippines, you know?
yo.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, and then because of that, you kind of just you start looking stuff up, and I think because of the generation that we have with online accessibility, we were able to find some of the other songs.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't even know Eraserheads was popular during the time they were popular. Like I got them at the tail end when they were doing like
Same.
hits from the what? I'm like hits already.
I know, like the first album I ever had was the singles album, the singles anthology, and I'm like, these are all the greatest hits. Like, what else is there? You know?
Yeah.
I think also that one you could find that at Virgin Records, Virgin Mega or Virgin Megastore. So
Really?
maybe I didn't steal yours. I had bought my
Yeah, I
own.
was going to say I bought mine in the Philippines. So I hadn't, when I went to the Philippines in college, I hadn't been for maybe like 17, 18 years at that point. I went when I was 3, and then I went again when I was 20. But in the lead up to that, I already knew that I was going to look for music, because I think around that time was when, I saw on Channel 18 kind of some of the Eraserhead music videos. They had one of the MTV Asia Award. Just kind of hearing about these bands, but because it was a pre-internet days. Well, I mean, there were still ways to download music, but there was no ways to download Filipino music that I could think of at the time. So it's like, okay, I'm going to buy all these CDs and like, get it out there for like all the UC Irvine folks, which is where we went to college. But I mean, like when I heard it for the first time too, and like, I don't really understand Tagalog very well because my parents don't even really speak it around me. They speak, I guess it's Kinaraya. It's like a offshoot of like Ilonggo, Hiligaynon.
Wow.
So like they also kind of have trouble with Tagalog too. So when we were listening to these songs, they would also kind of like, they understood it kind of, but they couldn't really translate it for me. And it's interesting, Elaine, what you were saying about, feeling kind of the lyrics and how deep it was. Cause when they heard it, they were like, oh, this is just some like teeny bopper, like teenager stuff. And so they were kind of making fun of like the content and stuff. So they don't connect with that on a level too, cause they left the Philippines in the 70s. And so their context for like OPM is what you guys were alluding to earlier, which is kind of the more ballady movie soundtrack sensitive stuff.
I'm sure it's an age thing too, right?
A little
'Cause, like
bit.
my parents, my dad's idea of OPM is like VST. Like he would used to go to like concerts in the Philippines to VST concerts. So like when I mention like Eraserheads and I'll play it, he'd just be like, it's too folky. Or my dad likes to sayaw. He likes the disco stuff, which is why he likes VST,
No, but it's interesting because my parents, when I started discovering the Eraserheads, are basically they had just turned 40. So they were kind of around just a little bit older than we are now. And so it's not like they were like complete. Yeah, we're old. But I mean, it's not like so like. And they were keeping up with what was going on in the Philippines through the international channels, and what was being exported through like places like Seafood City and things like that, right?
Yeah.
But when I would go to a Seafood City around that time too, I wouldn't find any of this stuff. I would find mostly the artists that you guys were listing off earlier,
Right.
and so I wonder if it's not even just a generational thing, but was there even a sensibility that there was this whole youth culture happening in the Philippines at the time, specifically in places like Manila, and some of the other major urban areas. Was there, at least at the time, did you feel like there was a connection between that was happening there and what was happening with our youth culture here as Filipino Americans?
I know like in that genre of music really exploded. I always call it Pinoy rock. I don't really call it OPM. That genre of music really exploded in the 90s, through those bands that we talked about. But then I guess it wasn't as popular after a while. And some of the bands that happen now, that kind of come out now, they're just a little bit more marginal, and they're just not in the public discourse in the Philippines. Here in America, at least among Filipino Americans, hip hop was more of the gravitational music genre.
Yeah.
So there was always I think there was always a disconnect between the youth culture there and youth culture here. And not to say there wasn't any overlap. There was.
But I mean, one of the things I've noticed too in a lot of these spaces with folks who are either, born in the Philippines and immigrated here or born in America, right? When they're kind of mixed together, there isn't really much of a mix. And I wonder to what degree that plays into, the acceptance or adoption of Filipino Americans born here, of things that are coming out of the Philippines culturally, right? I mean, we do tend to latch onto the very traditional things that we either learn through our parents or maybe even just like, things like traditional dance and stuff. But the more contemporary things, it seems like no one is particularly looking for it.
Like in college, if you do the whole Filipino American org thing, you're going to do PCN. So you'll know, like, you'll do Rondalia music and you'll know like traditional cultural things, right? But it's not like there's a OPM suite. There's no Pinoy rock suite.
Yeah.
So it's not like you'll learn.
Not yet.
Or it's like Filipino Americans understanding of what the Philippines is, what Filipino culture is, only through this kind of boxed version of whatever they learn at PCN, which is like dances and,
exactly,
and barongs and rondalia music.
Like, so we mentioned all these bands, and there's a movie that I feel like caused a resurgence into like at least my experience with OPM or Pinoy rock. It's the movie Rock and Roll. It screened at the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival
a couple of years ago.
And like, I remember when I watched it, I was like floored with the soundtrack, and it was beyond the Eraserheads that I already knew. And I was like, oh, hey, who are all these bands? So it caused me to go like look up bands and then get more into the scene and then to figure it out. But that was just me, and like through the magic of the internet, you have these things.
Yeah.
And then even when like those bands do shows in LA though, or in the States, like it's still mostly like an immigrant crowd.
Yeah.
It's like there's some kind of like gap between Filipino immigrants and then like Filipino Americans.
Yeah, it's something I noticed just working in the Filipino community at different kind of community organizations, and noticing that, I mean, and this is probably a whole nother topic entirely that we could talk about down the line, but just, that cultural divide between Philams and like Philam immigrants, and just not a lot of intermingling culturally or even socially.
Yeah, I get that. But I also think there's also like a cultural divide between music genres.
Yeah, that's true.
I think Filipino Americans, largely, especially ones in California, we grew up in kind of multi-ethnic neighborhoods and multi-ethnic schools.
Yeah.
Where there are a lot of like people of color around us. And at least in America, a lot of people of color, when you grow up, you kind of gravitate towards hip hop. White people gravitate towards rock, alternatives.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is definitely generalization.
Yeah.
And then the success of the relative success of Filipinos in hip hop, reinforced that Filipinos can succeed in this genre, which reinforced the fact that like these things spread amongst Filipino Americans. It contrasts with adoption of rock in the Philippines among Filipinos.
Yeah.
And I also think like in the Philippines, there's also there's a tinge of anti blackness within kind of hip hop. At least way back then. I think many people in the Philippines kind of shunned away a lot towards kind of a lot of the more quote unquote hardcore hip hop, because it was kind of quote unquote jologs. Like it was.
What does that mean?
What's jologs?
Great.
Someone look it up.
It's like,
no, I get what you're saying.
I don't
though.
say like corny, but like it's
Joe
lower
like
class.
joke
Or,
Yeah, one of the things I noticed when I went back to the Philippines, I went a couple times in the early 2000s just because we had a lot of family things going on, and my parents were building out, a home out in our hometown. But like culturally, for the youth there, it's a very different attitude towards, the way people view things like authority, like going to school, education. It's very much, it's considered a good thing and a popular thing, for a lot of youth, at least in the part of the Philippines my parents are from, to be a good student, to do right, to be obedient, to get a good
Not
job.
protest.
It's not considered like, lame, and people who are fans of rock music in general kind of that don't necessarily shun that, but are more about kind of this rebellious spirit and this attitude that like, we can make music that says something about the culture, that says something about how we feel about our world that is different from how our parents have advertised it to us. And so, I mean, that's always been kind of an element of rock music, I would say.
Yeah, but that's also hip hop.
But I mean, yeah, like we were saying though, like the hip hop that is accepted in the Philippines may not necessarily be along those lines. Is that what you're saying, or
In terms of its hardcoreness.
Yeah, but I also think like a lot of music, generally, it wasn't. Yeah, just wasn't accepted in the Philippines, as heavily. Like
I can see that.
because I remember when I went last time I went there was 2012, and there was like a Jay Dilla tribute like night, club
Okay.
night, right?
Was that crowded?
It was in Makati. It was crowded, but it was just a small little venue.
Okay.
Contrast to that, like an Eraserhead's concert or something can like
It's
draw
like-
like thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not saying it's not in the Philippines, but it's just in terms of mass popular culture, it's not as
Doesn't
big.
resonate
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. And so I looked up jologs. It's a term that, for someone who is tacky but implied in a more negative tone, often referring to people who belong to a lower class.
Oh my God.
I've
so it's
never
me?
heard that.
Is that me? Did you just
never
describe
heard
me?
To me, like I think what I carried, I was born, of course, in the Philippines, carrying over some of the things that I knew. I wasn't connected to the youth culture there after growing up here. I don't think my brothers were either. I know they were older than me and they had friends back there, and they're how did we communicate in the early 90s, right? We didn't really have, we had AOL. We didn't really have the ability to Skype or anything like that. But part of it is the accessibility. There's a giant ocean in between us.
literally?
Yeah. So like the coast of the western coast of the United States and the Philippines, in terms of just proximity, it's just harder to traverse that, whether it be music or whatever during the 90s.
Sorry, go ahead.
But I mean that's just a reality of kind of like the accessibility of the youth culture there for us as Filipino Americans or people who immigrated here. We didn't have that. We didn't have the ability to we would access it through the ways our parents would. Hence the stuff that we did latch onto were older, or what my parents knew, and anything that was ours was here.
Or
Yeah,
it's
but then what about like Mexican Americans? Like Mexican American youth culture is very distinct from Mexican youth culture, and they're not an ocean apart away. They do have a border, between them.
Yeah.
But I would say these cultural pathways are definitely more more easier to traverse between Mexico and Mexican Americans in the United States.
I think it's also like regionally it's easier. We're in California, so like Mexican culture, youth culture, it's not that far. Like a 3-hour drive in the 90s to get like that culture, to learn about it, is a little easier. And plus, like, our
that's what
TV stations.
But I guess what he's saying is like, why is it still so distinct though?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Regardless of the fact that the distance is not even nearly as big
Yeah.
for Filipinos and Filipino Americans. Right?
I mean, I think culture and like music as part of culture is very experiential. Experiential.
Yes.
I'm wrong with those words today.
I do.
It's a little hot today.
It's hot.
I think it's because when we in the 90s we were trying to figure out these things, like we were reliant on vendors with actual stores, right? Like I was reliant on like a video store to have certain Filipino movies, and that would be the only way I would know what to watch, right?
Yeah.
And the movies they would always recommend to me, because I was a 12-year-old girl, would be like romantic movies. Like this is why.
Well,
like,
those are the most of the movies anyway.
it's most, yeah, and so that's why like My Mina Mahal with Aga Mulak and Aiko Melendez is like my all-time favorite movie.
Mine is Forever.
I don't know that one.
You don't know that one.
Okay, Mike, you have to find this movie called Forever. But then I also remember this movie called like Chain of Flowers, and it was like super dramatic, and it had, I think the movies also had a song attached to them. So it's like you would learn, and like those are all ballads. They're not going to be like Pinoy rock like songs.
Yeah.
See, I would always leave the room. My parents would watch those movies because they were like, "Oh, there's Boomba in this. You can't watch this." But then, like,
There's no Boomba
the
in
only
My
movies-
Mina Mahal.
I know, but because I was like, I wasn't interested anyways. Like, the movies I would watch would be like Dolphy movies. So
Yes.
shout out to the Kizon family.
What is bomba?
What's Boomba,
Bold.
Mike?
Stuff that I wasn't allowed to watch when I was a kid.
What's bold, Ryan?
Bomba.
Bomba. Bomb.
Well, anyway, so I guess bringing it back. So
It means X-rated, just
Yeah,
so people know.
okay.
Bomba means X-rated.
So I mean, as these bands try to stake a claim to audiences in the United States, is there a way that they can really better engage, with Filipino American youth culture, or is it just one of those things that'll always just be this separate thing? Is there an opportunity for engagement, or is it more about like, well, people just don't listen to rock anymore, kind of thing, or is there something else there? And also, how much of this is also tied to kind of things like class, right? We were talking a lot about. A lot of these bands that, like recently are mostly from kind of the Manila scene, the Manila Pinoy rock scene. Whereas the Eraserheads was a band that seemed to transcend kind of all of that and was kind of known throughout the Philippines.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to what degree is, class a factor in how people address, absorb, and kind of find this culture? And, is there a way to kind of bridge things here in America?
I think it's like there's a lot there that you can touch on, because to me it's timing, it's
Marketing.
Marketing.
Yeah, it's like what you're doing now versus like I imagine like during like it's about booms, right? It's like the different kinds of booms, and what I'm trying to get at is the reason I found that music was because I freaking had access to the downloadable music. It wasn't marketed to me at all. Like a lot of the 90s rock music, Pinoy OPM music was not marketed to me as something that I should listen to here in America. So it was just timing. And then like the rise of even MTV Asia and the rise of different kinds of of music, even grunge here in the States, right? The rise of that availability became more of the reason why people would listen to something like Eraserheads.
I have to wonder if it is also like the music industry machinery in the Philippines, like if they're not viewing American audiences, Filipino American audiences, as something to reach out to,
Right?
Because like K-pop, right? Like as an example,
yeah.
like it's global. Like there are non-Koreans who know like K-pop, and they are dancing along and singing along to all these songs. They don't know what they're talking about, but there's like an Anna Kendrick video on Funny or Die of her joining a K-pop band, right? And it's because, of course, she did. But it's like because the music industry machinery in South Korea is such that they know how to like target an American audience or a more like global audience.
Well, maybe it's also with
And that
K-pop.
genre is like super pop.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's also
Yeah.
pop where you don't really need to know what the words are.
Yeah, as long as it's got a
enjoy
good beat
You
and
know?
you're dancing.
With like with rock music or or something slow,
Yeah.
like you kind of just, although you can kind of feel it with the you can feel the affect of it.
There's more of
through-
a ask to the audience member to know what.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Well, I mean, I'm just totally conjecturing. I don't know.
Yeah.
In terms of your question, Mike, I think at least the rock that's coming out now, all the indie music's coming out now. Isn't it like indie in the Philippines too? Like it's not huge.
Yeah.
Like the way the way Eraserheads was in the 90s. So it's even marginal in the Philippines, which makes it even harder to make it popular here in the States.
Right. Yeah, with the Eraserheads, like, of course, all of my cousins knew all about them, and like they would remember stories of them coming out to the UP campus in our hometown and doing shows there. And so, like, and that was a big, major community event. Whereas, like, if I mentioned, like, oh, so do you guys also listen to, Sandwich, which is led by a former member of the Eraserheads? They'll be like, well, I think we've heard of them, but And the other thing is that I've noticed is that, and this is not, I don't know if this applies anymore, is that a lot of Filipinos and Filipino immigrants listen to a lot of metal. So that might be a whole nother episode too, but there's a lot of like
there's a subgenre.
heavy metal. Yeah. So I mean, Filipino indie is kind of positioned kind of really kind of uniquely and weirdly, I think, for a lot of just your average everyday Filipino.
Yeah.
I want to touch on marketing a little bit, just because Elaine kind of touched on the way songs are and music, the way that she remembered OPM through songs like Bakit Labis Kitang Mahal, right? Like through Lea Salonga. So a lot of these movie titles were song titles first, right? So going to and kind of switching to like a movie like Rock and Roll. By the way, loved it, watched it. I made my entire family watch it.
It's on Amazon Prime.
It's on Amazon Prime.
You can watch it right now.
Oh.
I've watched it 4 times since the last time we talked about it.
4.
Loved it. Let me tell you what I loved about it. And we talked about why we loved the movie, because it was different. It was a love story that wasn't really a love story. It was about friendship. It was about music. But I can't tell you a single song from that show or that movie. It was not about that for me. And when I watched the movie, I appreciate it for what it was. But it didn't. Also, part of the reason I liked it is it didn't remind me of the older movies that kind of attached to a soundtrack already to it, right? So when you said like, oh, the music came out of there, I had to look it up. Me too, but I didn't do it for that. And part of like my draw to the movie was for the movie's sake, not so much for the music's sake. So I think part of that too is kind of, maybe I'm the bad person to market to when it comes to that kind of stuff. I don't have TFC. I don't have anything like that. I don't watch a lot of the shows that I could watch to connect me back to the homeland or to the Philippines. So I don't know what's going on there culturally or subculturally. So it's kind of strange, but when you talked about that movie, I looked at it as a standalone with the music as sort of like the topic as opposed to the other way around. So anyway.
Okay. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot to unpack still with this, and I think we're going to have Christine, who was a past guest, come back and have this conversation with us too.
Nice.
Yay.
One day when she can come
Christine
here.
Balance, again, was somebody who we interviewed and talked about kind of her book, Tropical Renditions, I believe, about, kind of Filipino and Filipino American music, but also is a cultural event producer and helped put on a couple of concerts that brought some of these bands here. And so I'm sure she'll have some interesting insights on that as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, and we brought up a lot of stuff here in this conversation too about just kind of Filipino, media and like things like films and pop culture, and how is that translated to Filipino Americans and how is that absorbed? And I mean, I think we'll definitely have a lot more to talk about, I think, in a future mini.
Yeah.
So.
Great.
All right. So
I have a question.
yeah.
You can edit this out, or I have the TFAL pan of the episode. Should I just record those as separate bumpers?
You can.
Okay, let's do that.
And also, I was also going to ask Ryan to send us out on a song, but
Yeah, Ryan, do it.
Try to tell us we're too young to really be in love.
dun, dun, dun.
Bahay namin maliit lamang, pero malinis to pati sa kusina.
So before we tie it up, Elaine, you wanted to shout out to the TFAL fan of the week?
Yes, so the TFAL pan of the episode is Rel. Thank you very much for contributing to our Patreon. You too can be a TFAL pan of the episode, where we shout you out by contributing to our Patreon, patreon.com/TFAL Podcast. And remember always to subscribe and rate us on iTunes so people can find us. It helps us get folks to find who we are on the internet, especially iTunes. And anything else?
Any other parting thoughts?
That's it.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
All right, bye. This Filipino American Life is produced by Michael Nailat. Our intro and outro music is by Roger Habon, aka 10.4 Raj. Resident reality checker Girly Colado, legal advisor Rianne Fajardo, and graphic design by Vincent Collyer.